Millionaire humiliates novice bricklayer without knowing that he would unmask him in front of everyone. The sun hadn't even fully risen when Jonas Matos arrived at the construction site with a lunchbox in his backpack and hope in his chest. It was his first day as a helper at Construtora Vasconcelos, one of the city's most renowned construction companies. At the age of 26, he had left behind his unfinished studies in civil engineering because of family problems and was now trying to start again, learning with his hands what he had previously only seen on the drawing board. Arnaldo, the master builder, gave him simple instructions and pointed out where he should follow the plan of the boundary wall. Jonas concentrated, measured, aligned, dug, but without knowing it, he used an old version of the plan, left in the materials trolley by mistake. Minutes later, the sound of expensive shoes echoed through the coarse sand. Eduardo Vasconcelos, the owner of the construction site, appeared with his typical expression of contempt. Without even asking what had happened, he pointed his finger in Jonas's face and exploded in front of everyone. "You're incompetent! This place is crooked as your life, I bet. People like you should be thanking me for being here carrying cement and not getting in the way of my schedule," Eduardo shouted, his eyes blazing. The workers stopped, and the silence fell like freshly mixed concrete. Regina, the architect, lowered her eyes, and even Arnaldo looked away. Jonah, his eyes watering and his hands still dirty with dirt, didn't say a word, but something in his expression had changed. It wasn't anger, it was certainty. Certainty that it wouldn't stay that way, because Jonas knew a lot more about that man than anyone realized. And inside him, the memory of the past began to boil like the cement just poured into the cement mixer. But for now, he just took a deep breath and went back to his seat. Eduardo walked away with clean shoes, stepping on the beaten ground as if he were above the dust, leaving behind a trail of shame and silence. Jonas, his face still hot from the humiliation, wiped his hands on his pants and continued his work, while his colleagues, who didn't have the courage to face him directly, exchanged discreet glances of solidarity. Arnaldo, embarrassed, tried to lighten the mood with a generic comment, but nothing could erase the impact of his boss's words. Regina, observing from afar, knew that this kind of attitude was common with Eduardo. He treated everyone as disposable, except those who feigned admiration or served his interests. But there was something different about Jonas. His calm wasn't that of someone who took offense. It was that of someone who knew how to wait for the right moment. At the end of the working day, in the changing room, Jonas sat down alone on a wooden bench and took out a plastic sheet of paper from his backpack. It was a copy of an old technical report, folded carefully. His eyes ran over the numbers and signatures and then landed on a name: Eduardo Vasconcelos. This wasn't just an arrogant boss. This was the same man who, years ago, had almost destroyed the career of an honest engineer and silenced the truth with threats. Jonas had been there as a trainee, as an invisible observer. Now fate had placed him there again, as a worker, like nobody else. But he knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about justice, about making that man face the consequences of the choices he had made. And while everyone saw him as nothing more than a bumbling bricklayer's helper, Jonas silently prepared himself. Because that work wouldn't just be about building walls. It would be the place where masks would fall off and buried truths would resurface. Jonas went back to work the next day as if nothing had happened, but inside him, every step he took was a countdown. He knew that Eduardo Vasconcelos wasn't just a stupid boss. He was a man who hid crimes under the facade of a successful businessman, and Jonas knew this because he had seen it with his own eyes. 3 years earlier, while still a trainee in a technical initiation program, Jonas had been asked to accompany an inspection of a public building site in the countryside. The company responsible, the same as Eduardo's. During that muggy afternoon, Jonas waited in the corridor while the meeting took place behind closed doors, but the door wasn't completely locked. And what he heard there made a lasting impression on him. Eduardo was negotiating overbilling with an influential counselor, altering the measurements of the work and exchanging materials for others of inferior quality. An engineer called Paulo Henrique tried to challenge the scheme, but was dismissed weeks later without explanation. Jonas kept everything in his memory, and when he tried to speak up, he was called a liar and dismissed. He was only 19 at the time, with no degree and no contacts. He tried to continue his studies, but his family was struggling. That's when he dropped out of college to work. And now, standing there on the same dirt floor of a new construction site, under the same name, he saw it all coming back. But with one difference, this time, he wasn't empty-handed. Jonas didn't know how, but he felt that this new chance that life had given him was no coincidence. It was purpose. Eduardo's words the day before still echoed in his mind, but not with pain, with motivation. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for truth, and it would come out, no matter how hard the cement tried to cover it. That night, Jonas could hardly sleep. Lying on the simple mattress in his small room at the back of his mother's house, he mentally reviewed every detail of what he had seen that afternoon years ago. He remembered the muffled sound of the voices, the way Eduardo laughed when he talked about guaranteed profit, the tension on engineer Paulo Henrique's face when he was interrupted with a "That's none of your business, boy." At the time, Jonas still believed that the world was fair, that all you had to do was tell the truth and the right people would do the right thing. But when he tried to report it internally, he was treated as someone who was getting confused, and a few days later, he was dismissed from his internship. That destroyed his plans. He lost his college scholarship, had to start working as a helper, and was swallowed up by a system that punishes the honest and protects the powerful. But he never forgot. How can you not forget the face of a man who uses his money to silence and his position to trample on others? Now, with Eduardo in front of him every day, the pain of the past was transformed into strength. Jonas didn't want applause or the spotlight. He wanted justice. Over the last few days, he had gone through his old notes, found the USB stick where he had kept copies of emails, records, and even a photo discreetly taken of the tampered panel of a construction site. The right moment would come, and when it did, Eduardo would be surrounded by all those who blindly believed in his image as an untouchable businessman. It would be in front of them that the truth would explode, and Jonas, the ignored worker, would no longer be invisible. Because there are things that money can't buy. And one of them is the weight of the truth, when it finally finds space to be spoken. On Monday morning, Eduardo Vasconcelos showed up at the construction site earlier than usual. He wore a neat navy blue suit, dark glasses, and was accompanied by 2 investors who wanted to see how the project was progressing. All the workers were called in for a short presentation, where Eduardo would make a formal speech. It was the perfect moment to display power, control, and confidence. And, of course, to eliminate once and for all the problem of the bricklayer who dared to make a mistake, Jonas Matos. In front of everyone, with the investors and the technical team by his side, Eduardo looked at Jonas and with the same sarcastic tone as a few days ago, began to expose his supposed incompetence, using words like negative example and technical failure. It was clear that he wanted to ridicule him one last time, in public, before dismissing him. But Jonas was ready. He took a deep breath, pulled a transparent folder out of his backpack and asked for the floor. The silence was immediate. With a firm stance, he simply said, "Before you fire me, Mr. Eduardo, it's important that everyone here knows who they're dealing with." Eduardo laughed, but the laughter died down when Jonas started showing old documents, Adulterated blueprints, emails saved as PDFs, a technical report with Paulo Henrique's signature, and finally the audio recorded by chance, in which Eduardo's voice directly negotiated the misappropriation of funds with a politician. All eyes turned to the businessman, who lost his footing. The investors exchanged tense glances, and Regina, who until then had remained neutral, stepped forward to look at the papers. This is serious, she said, her voice breaking. Eduardo tried to take the documents by force, but Arnaldo got between them. If that's true, you've destroyed a lot of people's lives, Eduardo, muttered the master builder, who had been quiet before. Eduardo turned pale. For the first time, the man who had always thought himself untouchable was at a loss for words. He tried to call Jonas a liar, frustrated, vengeful. But the documents were there, in the hands of people who would never have imagined that this young man with a hoe in his hands could be the bearer of such a powerful truth. The investors left immediately, calling their legal advisors. Regina, now unafraid, said that this could not be ignored. Arnaldo, who had been silent for years, shook his head in silence like someone who finally understood the truth behind the arrogance he had always tolerated. Jonas, standing in the middle of everyone, didn't shout, swear, or take revenge. He simply exposed what was necessary. When Eduardo threatened to sue him for defamation, Jonas replied, "You can try, but here, everything is documented, and now it's not just me." That sentence was the end. Eduardo stepped back. Knowing that his image had been destroyed, no one around him defended him. The team's silence was a judgment. Jonas then put his papers away, took the dirty glove off his hands, and left them on the concrete bench. He walked past his colleagues leisurely, like someone saying goodbye not to a job, but to a cycle of pain. When he reached the construction gate, he looked back one last time, not out of nostalgia, but like someone witnessing the fall of a tower erected with lies and pride. And he left, leaving behind a ruined landscape, not stone but masks. Because that day, on that clay and cement floor, a quiet bricklayer made more noise than any scandal. He proved that it's not the uniform that defines a man's greatness, but the courage to face the truth, and no one can bury that. And bury. That was today's story. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I'd really love to know where you're watching us from. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, now's the perfect time to hit that button and share this video with someone who needs to see it. I'll see you in the next video.